Mining in Zambia is considered the lifeline. In terms of formal jobs, mining is considered as the largest employer after government. This is why maintaining the sector has multiplier effects. This is Nightlife. We'll take a break. When we're back, I will be introducing my guest for tonight. We're discussing tax stability and growth opportunities for the mining sector. Now, this is the pre-national budget discussion, and with me tonight is the Zambia Chamber of Mines Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Sokwani Chilembo. Welcome to Nightlife.
Thank you very much, Francesca.
Briefly give us a background of the mining sector's contribution to the economy, when you talk about privatization, mining investments, etc.
Okay. Mining's been the primary driver of the economy going back to the 1940s, which is around the time that the mining companies got together and formed the chamber as an association of private businesses that are engaged in that business in this country. In the country saw a period of very dramatic growth from 1945 right through the 70s when nationalization took place. And once nationalization took place, obviously the chamber became a nullity with the onset of government control. But in 2000, after the privatizations were completed, the chamber was reconstituted, and the mining industry today accounts for 12% of GDP and 70% of exports. And as you mentioned, we employ 30,000 people directly, and indirectly another 90,000 people benefit from the industry. So it's a significant player in the economy.
And what is the state of the mining industry currently, and what should be done to stimulate its growth?
Okay, the mining industry currently is just beginning, after all these years, to eclipse the levels that we reached in the 1970s. I think 1972 is when we were doing about 750,000 tons, and we've just begun to surpass that level presently. We did so some 6-7 years ago, and unfortunately we've stagnated since that time. And the industry basically now, production is growing at very low single digits. So we haven't yet beat this target that we set for ourselves about 2005 for hitting the 1 million ton mark.
But what would you attribute that to, hitting the single digit?
Principally, this has been due to an element of policy instability as regards the sector. And this has impacted us in various ways, which I think we can go into as we progress the discussion. Yeah, but it's primarily due to shifting sands with regard to policy.
Okay, and what benefits will maintaining this stability in the mineral royalty regime bring into the mining industry?
Stability is the main attractor to investment capital into the mining industry, both in the sense of existing mines, like the ones that we have presently, that would like to expand their production and do a little bit more exploration work within the bounds of their licenses, and also for new exploration works that would expand the reserve areas of what is potential for us to mine in the country. And stability is the primary prerequisite to this. Other countries around us have maintained stable mineral royalty, in particular tax regimes, for in excess of 10 years, such as the DRC. And we've seen the DRC, despite all its logistical hindrances and other concerns, eclipsing us. They surpassed us in about 2013 as a producer and hit the 1 million mark 2-3 years later, well ahead of us. And they still remain ahead of us presently. It's a situation which really we should learn from, because presently we've had 3 years of stability in terms of mineral royalty tax, and we need this to be maintained in order to remain an attractive option for capital, which has choices. Capital has choices to go to other parts of the world where these minerals are available, perhaps not quite as well endowed as ourselves, but because of stability, those jurisdictions become more attractive to capital, and we desperately need this capital presently, because we must grow our level of proven reserves. Presently, if you look at US Geological Survey data, they are putting our reserves at around 20 million tons, which at today's rates gives us a lifespan of around 20 years for the mines. We need desperately to grow this figure, and we also need desperately to grow our present production levels at the same time so that we can extend the productive life of the mines, especially given very positive price outlooks going forward with the expected increases in demand arising from infrastructure, work that's likely to take place in the medium term, and also technological changes around electric vehicles going forward.
Okay, so why is it important to give the mining industry an indirect stimulus by amending the Income Tax Act for the mining companies?
Well, the old copper belt, the copper belt that we know and love, the old one, is, as you know, an underground mining zone. And the deposits there have tended to become deeper, and we need to do a lot of capital work to deepen and to sink fresh shafts in that area. Now, if we have certain provisions of the Income Tax Act constrained as they presently are, with regard to carry forward losses, when you're starting a business, you need the ability to offset this in order to bring forward your break-even time. We need to have the 10-year limit on this relaxed. We need to have the capital allowance claims from when you buy a large piece of equipment. We need the ability to have this relaxed apart from away from the capping that's presently in place, which has no other effect other than pushing forward the break-even date on a mining project. And we need to bring these mines into production and into the black as quickly as possible, so that we can then begin to apply the resultant capital in expanding production even further. Because we also have very large metallurgical treatment assets on the copper belt, which we need to feed. So we need to increase supply, we need to sink more shafts, and these constraints need to be removed in order to get us back into a growth mode. The same needs to apply to the Northwestern Province, where the mines there are much larger. They are open cast mines with low grades. They are big volume operations, but they too also need to have these constraints removed, because they are only beginning to, they are not taking full advantage of the potential that they have. Given the positive price outlook that we foresee, I think that there is a consensus about going forward from about 2022 to 2023.
Tell me, how are these constraints, how have they impacted the industry in the past? You've spoken about, amending the Income Tax Act for mining companies, but with the current act that is there, how has it really impacted the mining industry?
It slowed capital investment into the sector. We have seen some of our members sinking some shafts and doing some shaft redeepening, but it's not at a rate fast enough to increase production such that we move into the low double digits, for example, in terms of growth, and eclipse that or surpass that million ton mark, which is a big milestone for the country. So the slowdown in capex has also consequently resulted in a slowdown of business for the mining supply sector as well. So instead of having a situation where capex is sustained and continuous because we are investing for the long term, the industry has found itself in a position where it is really perceived as a short-term source of revenue for the fiscus. Primarily, that's the way that it is viewed. With the increase of mechanization and therefore the reduced number of people that are being employed in the industry, its contribution to the economy is becoming a little bit more opaque, if you like.
Speaking of employment, before you move on to the next point, we did see there was a time when there was so much employment within the mining sector, and then we saw there was a time when a lot of people lost their jobs. So how can the sector really try to bring back that so that more people can get back in these jobs, and as you said, also meaning that the mining industry can add more to the GDP?
Well, I think all of us hark back to those days, and we really wish for those days when there was full employment in the country.
Yes, the days of
the
ZCCM.
Or pre-ZCCM as well.
Yes.
But the fact of the matter is the best times occur when there's growth. If you look at the copper belt, those towns were built, and Ndola also benefited in a secondary fashion as a result of sustained growth in mining production from the 1940s on. And it's really a growth situation that can deliver these fruits. And we must understand that they are fruit and not the flower. It is the profits that are the flower from which we are then able to accrue these benefits. So the growth in jobs and the like can come, but not as much as it was in the past, because the business has mechanized to a large extent. We have more machinery in there, but we also need to look at it as a main driver of the economy in terms of the support industries. You know, there's some very, very advanced levels of engineering skill and technical competence that's required to provide services to the mines. And we need to maintain this by growing the sector and growing it primarily via growing production.
You're watching Nightlife, and tonight's edition is a pre-national budget discussion. And I'm joined by the Zambia Chamber of Mines Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Sokwani Chilembo. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back when we get to hear more on what the Zambia Chamber of Mines expects in this year's national budget. Welcome back. How has the amendment of the value-added tax regulations by the Zambia Revenue Authority affected the mining industry as well as the suppliers?
Yes. You had asked earlier on about the constraints that the industry has faced. This is one of them. The effect of the current VAT circumstances and regime have been basically even further damped growth in the industry. We have a situation where we have substantial amounts of working capital tied up in the VAT refund system. The assessment regime is also slowing down refunds for our suppliers as well, and it is making businesses book paper profits, if you like, but the cash is not actually in there.
So in short, you would like ZRA to speed up the process of the refund?
Yes, we
system.
would like the refund process accelerated, and we've made some proposals how that may be done without necessarily constraining the fiscus for cash or the treasury for cash, by offsetting our activities going forward. It's also led to a situation where we are not sweating those assets I was talking about that we use to treat ore, because we buy in ore from the DRC as well, and if the refunds do not come and tax is levied on those imports, then your margin actually remains with the ZRA, and you reduce your working capital. So you find yourself therefore basically what's called high grading. You end up taking in high grades of concentrate that have even additives like or adjuncts like cobalt as part of them, and that makes you still manage to break even, but it is a further drain on working capital for the industry. So with limited working capital, the industry has had to borrow to maintain its working capital position and keep going, which has increased costs, limiting how much you have to dedicate to growth, to exploration and the like. And it's also had an indirect effect on the manufacturing industry, actually, because we have had approaches from the Manufacturers Association asking about why we're not giving enough scrap, for example, to foundries and the like. But if we are using our assets to borrow, we obviously are not in a position to then begin to cannibalize them, because they must remain in their optimal state to cover the security that we've offered to our lenders. So it's a slowdown that trickles down all the way through the industry and its supporting sectors. And the effect has really been to slow business growth and opportunity for suppliers as well.
So in a few weeks' time, we'll be hearing from the Ministry of Finance and National Planning. The Minister, Margaret Mwanakatwe, will be presenting the 2019 budget. As the Zambia Chamber of Mines, what are some of the things that you would like, to see in this next year's budget?
Well, principally, the first thing that we'd like to see is, in fact, we'd like to see three primary things, and that's stability, and finally, even more stability. We really need the mineral royalty tax regime to remain as is, both in quantity and its regime with regard to deductibility and the like. This is necessary so that we can be assured of what is likely to be a viable return for the industry going forward, because we are at a tipping point. We have a very, very good demand situation for copper going forward. There are very few mines in the world that are coming on stream, and existing mines all over the world, the grades are beginning to drop, just as they did for us on the copper belt. But the advantage that we have is we have the massive old copper belt, which can be exploited. We have the new opening up copper belt in the northwestern province, which can be exploited as well. And if we just put a few things in place, get that stability down so that we can be a destination for capital, both in terms of production and exploration, and then if we can also have an indirect stimulus in terms of the relaxation of the carry forward losses and capital allowances that I had mentioned before, then we will be able as an industry to have the financial headroom to mobilize funds to begin to grow our production in the low double digits, so that in a few years' time we are talking about a multiple of what we were producing in 1972, as opposed to now, where we are just barely above where we were a year after I was born. Yeah. So really, it's time to prepare ourselves for what could be an industry-defining profit cycle from around 2022 going forward to 2030 and 35. Based on, like I said, demand arising from infrastructure investment in the developed world, which is a nice benefit of the spread of populism there, but also in terms of the technological dividend that comes from people switching to electric vehicles. It's good for copper, it's good for cobalt, and it's actually also good for a few other minerals we have within the country as well.
When we talk about, diversifying and the opportunities that are there for the mining industry in Zambia, what are some of the opportunities you can cite to say this is where the mining, industry can diversify so as to capitalize on what is there already?
Well, first, we're very fortunate. Copper is still the main story. It's still the main endowment that we have, and the story is not done yet. As I mentioned, we have the old copper belt. Despite the resources being deeper, it still holds much opportunity for the industry. We have the new copper belt in the northwestern province, open cast, larger deposits, which are similar to most of the very large deposits that are being found around the world. There's still opportunity for us there. There are other minerals associated with copper, in which we have much opportunity. In the northwest, we have a fully defined mine in Enterprise, just next to Sentinel, and that can move us into the nickel producing sphere, which is another mineral that is required for electric vehicle battery manufacture. We have manganese in Luapula, which is being exploited on rather a small scale presently, but with the appropriate policies in place, we could attract capital into that space as well and become a jurisdiction with almost all the battery minerals required for this oncoming boom present within our borders. And obviously there would be opportunities for value addition for the country as a whole. So that's only one. There's gold opportunities as well. And the beauty is the geology of the country is becoming better known. And even though our copper grades are falling, other mineral opportunities are coming to the fore, which perhaps not as large as copper, still provide opportunity for us to diversify and give, if you like, a bit of resilience to our mining industry with regard to price shocks.
Because the perception is that copper is the only thing that is, there to mine. But you've spoken of gold.
It is the majority. We do have other smaller opportunities, but copper is the base from which we must diversify. And, the thing with diversification is it is best done from a growth scenario. You don't want to diversify from distress, because if you do, you pay the attendant costs of borrowing money to do so. Best we do this from profits and growth.
Thank you so much for coming on to Nightlife. That has been my guest for tonight, talking about the pre-national budget and what the Zambia Chamber of Mines is expecting. Today we're talking tax stability and growth opportunities for the mining sector, and I was with the Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Sokwani Chilembo. That's all we had time for you tonight. Thank you so much for the pleasure of your company. I'm Francesca Piribanda. Good night and stay blessed.